Okay, so we're going to look at chapter 3 now. And chapter 3 discusses organizational environments and cultures. As part of our continued introduction or overview of management, if you will, we look at the organizational environment and culture. But wait, what is that? Somehow I knew you would ask that. So after going through the online lecture, how about you write down what comes to mind when you think of an organization's environment and culture and bring it to class and we'll talk about it. I certainly can't give extra credit last week and not try to do it this week. So make sure you guys bring that in. Here are our learning outcomes. We're going to be able to discuss how changing environments affect organizations, be able to list and describe the 4 components of the general environment as well as the specific environment, detail the process that companies use to actually make sense of their changing environments, and then be able to explain how organizational cultures are created and how they can help companies to be successful. An organizational environment, exactly what is that? Well, it's actually composed of forces or institutions that surround an organization. These things can affect its performance, its operations, and have an impact on its resources. It includes all of the elements that exist outside the organization's boundaries and have the potential to affect a portion or all of the organization. So it's those things that can affect it from the outside, but it's also things that can affect it. And when I say affect the organization from the inside. Internal and external forces can affect business, as I just stated on the last slide. What we're going to do is we're going to start by taking a look at the 3 basic characteristics of changing external environments, and we'll move on to internal environments a little later on in the online lecture. External environments are the forces and events outside a company, those things external or outside of the company that have the potential to influence it or affect it. They affect the decisions and performance of an organization or a company. If you think about Uber, it has changed the taxi business. When we talk about environmental, what we're referring to is the rate at which a company's general and specific environments change. And we're going to see what exactly general and specific look like a little later on. When we say that the environmental change of an organization has a stable environment, that means the rate of change is slow. For instance, apart from occasional shortages due to drought or frost, the wholesale food distribution business, where you get your dairy items, fresh produce, baked goods, poultry, fish, and meat, these are all processed and they're delivered by truck from their warehouses to restaurants, grocers, and other retailers. So little changes from year to year with regard to their processes. Distributors take the shipments from the farmers, food manufacturers, and food importers, consolidate them at warehouses, and then they distribute them. Now that's a little bit different than your dynamic environment. That's where your rate of change is fast. And if you look at the cell phone industry, you could probably tell me a lot more about why that environment rate is so fast. And then most people think that, or it's assumed that a company's external environment is just going to be either or. It's either going to be stable or it's going to be dynamic. But the truth of the matter is that research suggests that companies often experience both. And the United States airline industry is a classic example of punctuated equilibrium. And this is a theory, a research theory that just says that companies go through long periods of stability, followed by short periods of dynamic fundamental change, and then a new equilibrium. The next characteristic of external environment is called environmental complexity. The dairy industry is an excellent example of a relatively simple external environment. Milk, no matter how you get it, is produced the same way today as it was 100 years ago. Now, alternatively, at the other end of the spectrum, few industries find themselves in a more complex environment today than the personal computer or the PC business. PC sales were soaring beginning in the early 80s, but now with smartphones and tablets, sales have really dropped. Another component or characteristic of external environments is resource scarcity. Resource scarcity is the abundance or shortage of critical organizational resources in an organization's external environment. Those things that you need, to the extent that you don't have it, that refers to scarcity. And to the extent that you have a great abundance of it, that is decreased scarcity. A company, Chenab Limited, I think that's how it's pronounced, is a garment manufacturer in Pakistan. And it makes fashionable sportswear for global brands ranging from Victoria's Secrets to Tommy Hilfiger. But because Pakistan faces severe electricity shortages, the plant runs at only 1/3 of its capacity and it's forced to turn down orders. So it is at a limit due to the scarcity of the resource of electricity. Environmental change, environmental complexity, and resource scarcity, all of these characteristics of the external environment, they all affect environmental uncertainty. And that's the extent to which managers can predict which external changes and trends will affect their business. As you can see here from Exhibit 3.1, it shows that the lower the levels of environmental change, complexity, and scarcity, the more confident managers are in predicting and reacting to the external forces that affect their business. However, as we move over here and those levels increase, where environmental change and complexity are high levels as well as resource scarcity, uncertainty is then high. Managers don't feel as confident that they understand their business, that they can predict and handle the external forces that will affect them. As Exhibit 3.2 shows, there are two kinds of external environment that can cause or influence organizations, and that's the general environment and the specific environment. And I'd like for you to spend some time reading through these areas. I'm not going to go through them in detail here, but I do want you to read upon the components of both the general environment, which includes sociocultural trends, technology, political / legal trends, and the economy. And as far as the specific environment, we have competition, customers, suppliers, industry regulation, and advocacy group. The general environment consists of, as mentioned, the economy and those other arrows that you see there. And changes in any sector of the general environment eventually affects most organizations. So these items that you see here generally are going to affect any organization, not just one specific. For example, when the Federal Reserve lowers its prime lending rate, most businesses are going to benefit because banks and credit card companies will often lower the interest rate that they charge on loans, and consumers, on the other hand, who can then borrow money more cheaply, might borrow more money to buy homes, cars, refrigerators, and other things, other high cost things. But each organization also has a specific environment. And that's unique to that firm's industry and directly affects the way it conducts its day-to-day business. An example is given in your book about Yum Brands. It first entered China in the late 1980s, and Yum Brand had KFC and Pizza Hut restaurant. By 2012, KFC and Pizza Hut Chinese sales accounted for half of Yum's global revenue. That's huge. However, because of slowing sales due to healthier food options and an outbreak of the avian flu in the spring of 2013, Chinese consumers began eating much less poultry. So together, these changes have directly affected their sales, and I believe they reduced them or impacted them by 16%. Here you see a listing of the components of the specific environment, where you'll have the customers, competitors, suppliers, industry regulation, and advocacy group. And I think you're all pretty much familiar with probably the first four. Those all are, ones that we're probably pretty much familiar with. But you don't want to discount the power of the advocacy group. These are concerned citizens that band together, and believe me, they can try real hard and a lot of times do a lot of damage and influence business practices. One of the largest advocacy groups is PETA, and that's one group you don't want to mess with. As we discussed in Chapter 1, managers are responsible for making sense of their business environments. As our discussions of the general and specific environments have indicated, however, making sense of business environments is not an easy task. And so because external environments can be dynamic, confusing, and complex, managers use a three-step process to make sense of the changes in their external environment, which includes environmental scanning, interpreting environmental factors, and acting on threats and opportunities. Okay, we've been looking at trends and events outside of companies that have potential to affect them. Now we want to turn our attention to the internal environment. The internal environment consists of the trends and events within an organization that affect the management, the employees, and the organization's culture. Internal environments are important because they affect what people think, feel, and what they do at work. The key component in internal environments is organizational culture, or its sets of key values, beliefs, and attitudes that are shared by the members of the organization. Some things that will help to sustain the culture are organizational stories, and these are stories that are told by individuals within the organization, and they help to emphasize culturally consistent assumptions, decisions, and actions of the organization, as well as organizational heroes. This is a second way in which organizational culture is sustained by recognizing and celebrating heroes, and a lot of times that begins with its founder. A lot of times it is the founder that creates that imprint with those beliefs, attitudes, and values. And finally, we have successful organizational cultures. What influences success? And that would be adaptability and a clear and consistent mission. Typically, companies that have these factors, or these factors are part of the organization. They experience higher sales growth, return on assets, profit, quality, and employee satisfaction. So be sure to read through the chapter, and I look forward to seeing you in class.